Here's an interesting thing. So one of the postmodernist claims is that diversity is necessary. And they make it racial, and they make it sexual, and they make it ethnic, and all of that. That's actually technically incorrect, by the way, because I study individual differences. So those are the differences between people. And I know the literature. So you know about James Damore's memo, right, from Google. He wrote that partly because he was watching my videos, which is why he wanted me to interview him. And I'm a believer that there are biological differences in temperament between men and women, apart from the other obvious differences, and that they're actually not trivial. And that they maximize in the societies that have moved farthest to producing egalitarian states, the Scandinavian countries, and that the reason for that is that there's two reasons why men and women differ in temperament. One is biological and the other is environmental. And if you remove the environmental variation, which you do if you make the state egalitarian, you maximize the genetic variation. And that's been demonstrated in the scientific literature over about 4 decades. And no one wanted it or hoped for it, and they weren't biased in looking for it because that was exactly the opposite of what social scientists wanted to find. Because social scientists lean heavily to the left, and what they wanted to find was you flatten out the state so that everyone has equal opportunity and the differences between people disappear. That is not what happened. The opposite happened. That was wrong. And no one was happy about it. And no one's happy about it now. You can actually tell when you've discovered something in a social science, because you're not happy about it. But if you take, let's say, there's a big difference between men and women in terms of trait agreeableness. Compassion and politeness. On average, women are more agreeable than men. And the difference is approximately this. If you take random pairs of men and women out of the population, let's say you had to make a bet on who was more agreeable. If you bet that it was the woman, you'd be right 60% of the time. Well, that's not that much. It means you'd be wrong 40% of the time. That's almost 50% of the time. So this is a big difference by social science standards, but that's the magnitude of the difference. There are some differences that are bigger, like the difference between men and women's interest in people versus things is actually bigger than that. That's the biggest difference we know. But it's a big difference, let's say, the agreeableness difference, but still, the shared attributes of men and women far outweigh the attributes that differentiate them. Because you could ask, are there more differences within groups or between them? Now, the postmodern answer to that is between them. That's why you need diversity by group, right? That's why you need different races. That's why you need different ethnicities and sexual preferences and all of that. Well, that's wrong. There's more difference within the groups than there is between them. You don't get diversity by crossing the groups. You get diversity by selecting across individuals. In fact, the idea that there is more differences between groups than there is between individuals is actually the fundamental racist idea. It's the fundamental racist idea, which is, well, let's say you're Asian, Oriental, to use the old word to discriminate the one type of Asian, say, from the other. You're so different from me that there's no overlap between our groups. And you're also so different, and there's so little difference within your group that now that I know that you're not me, you're not one of mine, I actually know what you're like. No. Technically, that's incorrect. That's wrong. That isn't how you get diversity. Now, diversity is actually necessary because people differ in intelligence, and they differ in temperament, and they differ in skills, and so you actually need diversity, because otherwise you can't take advantage of all those differences. So you need diversity. But you need genuine diversity. And like, what would genuine diversity mean? If you're trying to put together a work team, you want people of sufficient diversity so that they more or less, so that you gather together the appropriate talents to produce the implement that's necessary to work properly in the world. That's a competence marker. Because otherwise your business is going to fail. And so the proper diversity with regards to employment is the diversity that meets the requirements of the business, essentially. Obviously. That's why you try to hire people carefully and not randomly, let's say.